The Beaumont Children, 1966. 3 children vanished. Facts, memories, and myths. After more than 1,000 hours of research, this narrative podcast revisits Australia's most haunting mystery. Through the lens of facts, memories, and myths, we step back into the everyday world of the 3 Beaumont children: Jane, 9, Arnna, 7, and Grant, 4, who all vanished from Glenelg Beach, South Australia, on Wednesday, January 26th, 1966. It was an extremely hot Australia day, and at 10 a.m. the 3 Beaumont children set off on a short bus ride to the popular Glenelg Beach. The bus driver, Mr. Monroe, and one other person on the bus later confirmed that the children had boarded the bus and got off at Glenelg's Moseley Square. Australia was celebrating its 178th birthday with a 21-gun salute at 12 noon. At the same time in Somerton Park, Nancy Beaumont waited at a bus stop for the return of her 3 children from Glenelg Beach. They were not on the bus. Thinking that they may have missed the 12 p.m. bus, she went back there again at 2 p.m. when the next bus was due to arrive from Glenelg. She did not know that her children would never return and how they would become the greatest mystery Australia has ever known. The children's parents, Grant, more commonly called Jim, and Nancy Beaumont, lived at 109 Harding Street, Somerton Park. A quiet Adelaide suburb where the streets were safe, the neighbours knew each other, and the beach was just a short walk, bike ride or bus ride away. Like so many Australian families of the time, their lives were simple, modest, and full of routine, with the beach as their playground and the love of their parents and for each other. The Beaumont children were perhaps even happier than most Adelaide families. Jane Beaumont was a very intelligent 9-year-old. She was very bright, very studious, and loved reading books. She had topped her 40-student class every year at Paringa Park Primary School. Jim Beaumont described her as having the mind of a 15-year-old. She was responsible and caring, always looking out for her younger brother and sister. Arnna, at 7 years old, went to school because she had to. She had a cheeky streak and a love of adventure. She was a great little singer and liked to dress up and live in her own fantasy world. Grant was just 4 but seemed a bit older. He was the baby of the family, curious, playful, and adored by his sisters. Jane and Arnna would ride their 3-wheeler bikes to and from Paringa Park Primary School, just over 2 kilometres away, and spent long summer days at their local beaches, Somerton Park and the Broadway at South Glenelg. A trip to Glenelg Beach itself was more a family affair for the Beaumont children, often just with Jim, as Nancy was not keen on the beach. On January 26, 1966, Glenelg's foreshore was alive with thousands of families, all trying to catch a bit of the cool breeze on an extremely hot summer's day. Glenelg was Adelaide's holiday playground, with its beautiful white sandy beach, crystal blue water, jetty, and fun fairs forming a large entertainment hub along its foreshore. Seasonal carnivals brought extra amusement rides and sideshows to coincided with Australia Day and the summer school holidays. By evening, the foreshore and fun fairs were lit with the glowing strings of lights, transforming the seaside into a carnival ribbon visible from the water. Police would describe the crowds as good-natured, with only minor incidents reported. For many Adelaide families, the Glenelg Fun Fair was the traditional centrepiece of the summer school holidays, a place where the ordinary rituals of sandcastles and swims were joined by the bright spectacle of sideshows and rides. The 1960s in Australia was a time of change, but for children like the Beaumonts, it was still a world of freedom. Parents thought nothing of letting children catch the bus to the beach, buy lunch at their local bakery, or spend hours playing outside until the streetlights came on. It was a decade when childhood was lived outdoors with little money but plenty of imagination. The Beaumont children's lives reflected that innocence. They were ordinary kids in an ordinary suburb, growing up in a country that still believed children were safe when left to their own devices. And that is precisely why their disappearance struck such a deep chord. It shattered the illusion of safety that defined the era. The disappearance of the Beaumont children was not just the loss of 3 young lives, it was the collapse of an entire presumption that childhood in Australia was safe, unassailable, and beyond the reach of harm. Children had no smartphones or video games to dictate the pulse of their day, only their imaginations and the wide open world around them. Youngsters would cycle or walk to school and back home again by themselves, with parents knowing that their children knew the simple rule of be home before dark, which softly underscored a universal trust, a promise that the boundaries of freedom would be respected. The Beaumont household had an unusual rhythm, one that rested heavily on Jane's young shoulders. At just 9 years old, she wasn't simply an older sibling, she was a caretaker, a quiet pillar of reliability in a family where trust was placed in her ability to manage things on her own. A note she wrote to her parents just days before the children's disappearance reflected this dynamic in a way that, in hindsight, feels both poignant and unsettling. It reads, "Dear Mum and Dad, I am just about to go to bed and the time is 9. I have put Grant's nappy on, so there is no need to worry about him wetting on the sheet. Grant wanted to sleep in his own bed, so one of you will have to sleep with Arnna. Although you will not find the rooms in very good condition, I hope you will find them as comfortable as we do." Jane then writes, "P.S. I hope you had a very nice time wherever you went. P.P.S. I hope you don't mind me taking your radio into my room, Daddy." This note from Jane was a small act of personal comfort, perhaps an attempt to feel closer to the adults in her life. It was the voice of a child forced into maturity, ensuring her youngest brother was taken care of before heading to bed herself. There was no mention of seeking reassurance or waiting for her parents to return, just a statement of self-sufficiency, as if she had long accepted that responsibility was hers alone. Even in the small details, Jane was managing the household in her parents' absence, thinking ahead about sleeping arrangements in a way many children wouldn't. Jane's words reflected a quiet desire to maintain order, to make things comfortable for her parents on their return home. The casual mention of her phrasing was telling wherever they went. It wasn't a specific acknowledgement of an outing the family had discussed, but a vague, detached remark, as though Jane was not always privy to her parents' plans. The note, written in the innocent scrawl of a child, was meant to be routine, a practical check-in rather than a cry for attention. Yet in retrospect, it speaks volumes about the structure of the Beaumont home. A 9-year-old girl entrusted with the well-being of her siblings, organising their bedtime routine while their parents were elsewhere. It wasn't just a testament to Jane's responsibility, it reflected a household that operated under a quiet distance, where the line between childhood and adulthood had blurred long before that fateful day in January. The parents' absence that night echoed what some living close to the family had observed. Nancy Beaumont, described as a stay-at-home mum in media reports, was rarely home, leaving Jane to fill the gaps. Jim and Nancy kept a very busy social life, but stated how that all changed after the disappearance of their children. They felt that friends and relatives just didn't know what to talk to them about and whether they should bring anything up about the children and their disappearance. Arnna had made a comment to her mother the week before they disappeared that Jane had a boyfriend down at the beach. Not at Glenelg Beach, but down at the beach. At the time, Nancy thought nothing of Arnna's comment. All three children had bikes. Jane and Arnna would often ride down to Somerton Park Beach to a place commonly called the Broadway because it was situated close to their home and had a kiosk and change rooms. Perhaps young Grant was considered too young to make the nearly 2-kilometre ride, as visits to Glenelg Beach were more a family affair, either by car with Grant or sometimes by bus with Nancy. It's more likely the boyfriend Arnna refers to was at Somerton Park Beach, or even the Broadway Beach at South Glenelg. Jane's best friend Jenny was in the same class as Jane at Paringa Park Primary School and lived close to the Beaumont's house. Jenny was the same age as Jane, and during a recent TV interview, Jenny stated that because Jane and Arnna had three-wheeler bikes, she would stand on the back holding Jane's shoulders as she pedalled along, and often after school they would go home to Jane's place and have something to eat. The doors were locked, but Jane had a key. The home was always empty, and Jane's best friend stated that in the 3 or 4 years they knew each other, she had never met Mr. or Mrs. Beaumont. Jenny's father had died, and her mother suffered a mental illness. She was often alone, which is why she bonded instantly with Jane. They were in a little world of their own. They both had a very similar home life, being responsible for themselves and with parents that didn't have a lot to do with them. During the TV interview, Jenny stated that Jane could best be described as parentified. Jane was the protector of Arnna and Grant. She would never have let anything happen to them without causing a big commotion. Jenny described Jane as being very confident and always did what she was told, never to talk to any strangers on the beach, to always swim and play around groups of other beachgoers. The Beaumonts weren't unusual in their trust. Parents across Australia raised their children to be independent, confident, and capable of navigating their own experiences. Jane, already mature beyond her years, naturally fell into the role of caretaker, ensuring her younger siblings were fed, settled, and ready for bed even in their parents' absence. Yet January 26th brought a tragic twist. Unlike other afternoons that ended with the welcome sound of a family reunion at home, the Beaumont children never returned. On an extremely hot Australia day, Jane had convinced her mother to allow her to take Arnna and Grant to Glenelg Beach by bus, a journey that their mother Nancy stated later they had never done before by themselves with young Grant. Over the years, Nancy suffered deep regret and anguish for having allowed them to go to Glenelg Beach alone that day. She spoke of how she was in the wrong and no one would ever convince her otherwise. Nancy's words, not mine. Jim Beaumont had taken the children to Glenelg on the Monday and stayed with them all day. On the Tuesday before Australia Day, Jim dropped them off at Glenelg Beach on his way to work. Before driving away, Jim sat in his car, watching them for half an hour where the children could not see him. The Tuesday drop-off and the anxious waiting to see if they were okay also confirms that the three children had never gone to Glenelg Beach on their own before. Their mysterious disappearance forced parents to re-examine the delicate balance between encouraging independence and ensuring safety. A turning point that forever changed the collectively held beliefs regarding child supervision in an age that once believed in the simplicity of be home before dark. My next podcast will include research of eyewitness testimonies taken by police after that fatal day. Thank you for listening.